think that's the loudest I've ever had to talk in this room. So, so I want to welcome everyone to our West Side Batavia Ghost Talk.
They can get up and walk if they want. But
not to be confused with our walk, which is happening all throughout October. So I like to call this the Ghost Walk without the walk.
Sounds good to me. That's why we're here.
So I want to thank you all for coming. Connie Boyd, who also leads the walks, will be doing our indoor version tonight. And you'll be learning about 13 different... 12? We'll just throw one in at the end.
Will we? And Ryan will throw it.
I'm sure I could come up with something.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, we have to go upstairs.
Maybe more than just upstairs. But so I will let Connie take it away, and hope everybody enjoys.
Are you turning down lights or not? Yeah. Gotta set the mood. So welcome. We are going to be talking about, actually I'll be talking about West Side stories, and not just ghosts. I want to tell you about murders. I want to tell you about grave robbing, and some other wonderful things that have happened in Batavia. All true, all reported in the local paper, so we know they're true. And I want to start with a building very close to this one. Many of you, if you're Batavians or live in the county, you know this, the Engine House. Now, many consider the Engine House to be the most haunted building in the city of Batavia. Gregory Halleck would probably dispute that with you. He thinks it's Go Arts. I think everybody's vying for a title. But the Engine House, again, considered very haunted. Now, it is a municipal building. As far as I know, it is still in the hands of the county, and it houses the Facilities Management Department. But this structure is not the first building to sit on that site. The first building was a mill, built in the early 1800s, and it stood on the site for over 80 years until it was destroyed by fire in 1884. So the brick building you see was built in 1885. Again, built as a municipal building to house waterworks and sewer collection. Now, in 1906, an addition was put on the building, and that's so village meetings could be held there, and they were from 1906 right up until 1915. Patty Pacino, what happened in 1915?
We became a city.
Yay, we became a city. No more village meetings, you're a city now. But it also marks the year of a tragedy that occurred in this building, a large explosion. And with that explosion, possibly the creation of one of the spirits said to roam the halls of the Engine House. John Coleman was a caretaker for the building, and it was his job to check on the operation of the pumps in the building. And in order to do this, and he did it several times each day, he had to descend a set of steps in a well. On John Coleman's last day of life, he descended the steps as he always did, but he was carrying a lantern, and it's believed that his lantern blew out. When he struck a match to relight the lantern, I see grimacing, that flame met with the accumulated natural gas, and the explosion occurred. They were able to pull John out of the rubble after the explosion, but he was severely injured, badly burned, and he died 6 hours later. So is John one of our spirits? Most likely, yes. If you're a believer, John's there. Could there be firefighters still in the building? Well, it served as a fire station or engine house from 1948 till 1978, and 2, possibly 3 firefighters died in the building. So yes, people believe there are firefighters that remain. I'm told that if you walk through the Engine House, and remember it's a smoke-free building, and if you smell smoke behind you, you're being followed by Smitty. Yeah. So be aware, county workers have reported this. But there's also a ghost that's seen frequently at the Engine House, and he's not at all affiliated with this building. He's affiliated with the mill. Anyone who has seen him, and he's been seen by county workers as well as restaurant employees, because some of you may remember that this building did a stint as a local restaurant. Anyone who saw him described him as being breathtakingly handsome. He has dark hair, he's tall, he's wearing a flowing white shirt, black trousers, black boots, and he's always seen out of the corner of your eye, so when you turn to talk to him, he's not there anymore. But ghosts are not just seen, they're heard in this building. It's been reported that when you're working alone in the building, many times you hear footsteps on empty staircases. You hear doors open and close. Now, I don't know how often the county lets you go in this building, but if you get a chance, I hope you all get a chance to hear and see and smell some of these spirits. We're going to move on to Ellicott Avenue. One of my favorite streets in the city. I can't afford to live there, oh darn. But I want to tell you about spiritualism and about a quite renowned spiritualist who lived on Ellicott Avenue. And her name was Reverend Mary Ward Gifford. Now, Reverend Gifford was not a Batavian native. She came to Batavia in 1912, and she came to visit her sister, Elizabeth McDonald. But she decided to stay in Batavia. She must have really liked it. And she took up residence at 5 Ellicott Avenue. And she began to gather together a congregation of spiritualists. Now, some of you may be familiar with spiritualism. Very popular in our area in the 1800s into the 1900s. Spiritualists believe that the living can communicate with the dead. And you do this through a living person called a channel or a medium. And that was Reverend Gifford. Now, she was so popular, so charismatic, within a year, she had so many people in her congregation meeting in her parlor, there was no more space. And so they moved to Main Street. They rented space on Main Street. But as with all large groups, a dispute arose. There were members of the congregation that wanted to form a choir. And according to Reverend Gifford, they simply murdered music. And so, all the tone-deaf members stayed on Main Street, and all those in agreement with Reverend Gifford came back to 5 Ellicott Avenue. Now, because she was very well known and respected in the spiritualist community, she would have many guest speakers come in. And many of those would come from a place that some of you may be familiar with, or that you may even have visited. I know I have a couple times. Has anyone been to Lilydale? Okay. A gated community, a spiritualist community still in existence today near Fredonia. So she would have guest speakers, they would do seances and services in her living room. And she practiced spiritualism in this house and had a congregation for over 20 years. Right up until 1934, when she died at the age of 87. She was laid out in her parlor, and she's buried in Corfu, New York. Now, spiritualism didn't die with Reverend Gifford. It continued to flourish in our area right up until about the 1950s, 55, 56, is when we really can no longer find any major reference to the existence of a spiritualist congregation in Batavia. Now, people that have gone on my walks, and if you're ever taking a stroll to Dunkin' Donuts at night on Ellicott, maybe you'll see these. Believers say that when they take pictures of this house, they see orbs. And most people believe that orbs are a sign of spirit activity. And very likely, wouldn't it make sense that they would hover over this house where they were called for over 20 years? But I'd like to forewarn you, if you're sensitive to spirits, I'd be very cautious, because they're all waiting to hand over those messages, and they've been waiting since 1934, so be careful. Okay? We're going to move to Mixed Place, I believe. Yes, for Mixed Place.
I see that every day.
Don't you? Now, gorgeous house. It needs some TLC. I think it's sat empty for a few years. To my knowledge, it has a new owner, and I'm hoping to see a little paint A little repair on the front, I'm saying a lot of paint. A little repair on the front fence. I mean, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous house. Now, anybody that may know me knows I'm a pretty crazy gardener. And I got rid of my whole lawn and all I have is flowers. So I look at this house and I see opportunities, right? Oh my gosh. Rose gardens, herb gardens, you know, the moons know what I'm talking about too. There'd be no grass left in this, right? Other people look at it and with the horribly hot summers think, oh, an in-ground pool, I'd have room for that, right? How about a cemetery? Anybody want their own cemetery? Okay, we got one person, but
Yes.
most people don't.
I'm
yet-
married, so.
Well, if you buy this house, you may already have one.
Ooh, yay!
Because the owner of the house back in 1966, a local attorney, filed all the necessary paperwork to have this declared as private burial ground. Now, some things you might want to know about this attorney. He was up on forgery and grand larceny charges. There are a number of banks trying to force involuntary bankruptcy, so he owed a lot of people a lot of money. And if your land is declared as private burial ground, you're suddenly exempt from money payments. I think you're all going to go home tonight, aren't you? You're going to research this, right? Yeah, I see it already. I see it in your eyes. Check with the health department, check with zoning. I don't know if they frown on this, but this is actually in R1 and it is permitted. So was this attorney just attempting to safeguard his property from everybody he owed money to? Could be. There's another important piece of the law, though, you should be aware of. In order to even file the paperwork, which he did, he had to have documentation to prove there were already bodies buried on the property. So I'm hoping the new owner plants very shallow plants, shallow root systems. So that's mixed place. Oh, we're heading back to Ellicott Avenue. This is Howard Benham. What a handsome man, right? We're talking about the Benham family, in particular, Howard. They lived in a house that still stands today. It's on the corner of Ellicott and Washington. Kind of pretty pinky purple house. I didn't do a picture because I don't want you to hang out in the yard. Okay? But you have to imagine that it's not 2022. It's 1897. It's not October, it's January. It's not early evening, it's the wee hours of the morning. So if you were standing there or looking out the window at that time, it would have been dark and just so still and so cold. The only sound you might hear would be the creaking of ice-covered branches. And then the door to the Benham house flies open and Howard comes running out and disappears down Washington Avenue. Within a few minutes, he comes back with another man, a man with a black medical bag. But as they reach the front door, an elderly woman throws open the door and screams, "She's dead! I know she's dead." And indeed, when Howard and the doctor enter the house, what do they find? But Florence Benham is dead. She's died of a heart condition. The doctor can do nothing more except attempt to console her grieving mother, her distressed husband Howard, and their young son. Florence is laid to her eternal rest, and it should be the end of my story. But it's not. Because soon rumors began to fly about Batavia. That would never happen today, would it? Oh, no. It was a different time, wasn't it? First rumor was about this man, Howard Benham, the husband. Howard was a local banker, worked in banking, and he was very handsome by all accounts, very attractive, but he was also considered to be quite a philanderer. He was a ladies' man. And as handsome as Howard was, his wife Florence was said to be as equally unattractive, but she had some sizable assets. And so people think that Howard killed her for her money. Okay. So that's the first rumor circulating. Second rumor is about the doctor. the doctor that was in attendance caring for Florence even prior to her death. And this rumor said Florence didn't die of a heart condition. Florence died from a botched illegal operation performed by the doctor. Okay. Well, as we know, rumors get back, right? We hear them. And the doctor hears the rumor about himself, and he disregards it. He knows he did everything he could for Florence. He had been at the house a number of times before her death. He knew he was trying to help her with a heart condition. He did everything he could. So he just dismissed the rumor and ignored it. But the doctor's wife wasn't so agreeable about it. She went right to the district attorney and she demanded that Florence Benham's body be dug up and an autopsy be performed to prove that her husband had done nothing illegal. Well, she had to be one persuasive woman, for indeed the DA ordered Florence Benham's body dug up, an autopsy was performed, and guess what they found? Florence died of a heart condition. And so Florence was reburied, laid to her eternal rest. Oh no. For soon a young pharmacy clerk by the name of Sam Elliott came forward. Now Sam had been struggling with his conscience ever since he heard of Mrs. Benham's death. And he just knew he had to go talk to the district attorney and tell him about a transaction or interaction he had with Howard at the pharmacy just days before Florence's death. Yeah. Now Howard had gone to the pharmacy and bought prussic acid. And he said it was to kill a dog. Okay. And he didn't want to sign the poison registry. Can you believe at one time you could go buy poison as long as you signed your name? Ooh, this one's too excited by this. I'm sorry. So he didn't want his name down on the register and he bought this poison. And so if that wasn't damaging enough, what Sam said next to the district attorney really capped it. He said, Mr. Benham was incredibly interested in an article in the paper that talked about a Canadian man who successfully killed his wife using prussic acid. So now the district attorney once again orders Florence Benham's body dug up and a second autopsy, but this time what are they looking for? Poison, prussic acid. And they find enough prussic acid in her system to kill 7 men. Howard is now arrested. He's charged with the murder of his wife. He stands trial. He's found guilty. He's sentenced to the electric chair, and he's sent to Auburn State Prison to await that fate. Now, over the course of a couple years, Howard has written a book, and with the money he earned, Bill might be able to tell us about this. The money he earned, he was able to finance a new trial. And so he was granted in 1899, he was granted a new trial, and it commenced in 1900. Now, even though Howard had spent a little time in jail, it didn't seem to diminish his good looks because he still had all these female admirers. And the second trial was not held in Batavia, it was moved to Canandaigua. And there, sympathies ran very high for Howard. In fact, all his female admirers during the trial showered him with flowers and candy and gifts. Now, as quickly as the Batavia jury found him guilty, the Canandaigua jury found him innocent, and he was a free man. But fortunately, because I don't like Howard, Howard died within a year of typhoid fever. Woo. So that's the story of Howard Budd.
Oh yeah.
Let's move further up Ellicott Avenue. However, that beautiful row mansion that you see on the corner of Richmond and Ellicott was built by Rowell with his second wife. And he lived there with his second wife. This is the story of his life with his first wife. The year is 1883, and E. Newton Rowell lives on Bank Street. He has a beautiful Gothic style home on Bank. It still stands there today. Ryan knows the number. He might share it with you.
123.
Okay, there you go. So he had this beautiful house on Bank Street. He was married to Jenny. She was a very beautiful blonde woman. He had 2 young children. He also had a growing paper box business. And anybody native to Batavia, I mean, I even remember the paper box factory along the creek. Okay. So he had beautiful house, beautiful wife, loving children, growing business, happy man, right? No, he's not happy. He's suspicious and he's doubtful. And because his business is forcing him to be on the road more and more to promote it, he's fearful that his wife has resumed an affair with a Utica attorney by the name of Johnston Livingston Lynch. Now, at the time, Raul confided in friends that one of the main reasons he moved the family from Utica to Batavia was to get his wife away from this man. And again, he's on the road again, he's traveling, he's not home, so he's fearful that she has resumed this affair. Well, Raul can't live with doubt, so he hatches a plan that he implements. And it all starts at dinner at the Raul House on Bank Street. If you were there for the evening, it was Sunday, October 28th, 1883. And as he sits down to dinner with his wife, he says, I'm leaving tomorrow morning on a business trip, and I'll be gone a couple weeks. So Monday morning comes and Raul packs up everything he needs for his trip, and he heads to the train station. What do you think he got on a train? No. He booked a room at the hotel across the street, and he began to lie in wait, just knowing Lynch would come to town. He didn't have to wait very long. Tuesday night, who does he see getting off the train but Johnston Livingston Lynch? So Raul packs up all his stuff. He runs home. He sneaks into a back staircase up into the house and hides in a bedroom adjacent to the master bedroom. Now later he was to tell authorities that his plan was this. He was going to wait until he heard the creak of bed springs in the master bedroom. And then he was going to rush in and pull on the light. Now I don't know if any of you have older homes, but I know I used to have lights the center of the room and there was a pull chain that would light them. So that was the kind of light in the master bedroom. He'd pull on the light. He'd reach in one pocket. Notice it, pockets. He'd pull in one pocket and he'd throw black pepper in Mr. Lynch's face, temporarily blinding him. He'd reach in the second pocket. He'd pull out a slingshot. And he would hit Lynch and drive him into the street where he could be publicly humiliated for his actions. That's the plan. That's the plan. So Raul is hiding in his bedroom, and suddenly he hears the creak of bed springs, and he knows now he must act. He rushes into the bedroom. He reaches for the light. He misses the chain. No light. He reaches into the pocket. He pulls out the pepper. He throws it. He misses Lynch. He can't see what he's doing. Okay? Now he reaches in the other pocket. What did he pull out? Slingshot? No, he pulled out a loaded revolver. He did a substitution. Kind of like at the fast food restaurant, right? You know? So he has a loaded revolver and he starts to fire. And he misses Lynch. Fires a second time. He misses Lynch. Lynch is now realizing something's amiss. He jumps out of the bed. He starts to try to put on his clothing and get out of the room. He's semi-dressed. He pushes past Raul. He gets to the door. Raul fires a third shot. He hits the door jamb. Lynch is down the hallway. He's at the top of the steps. He probably figures he's free. He's almost out of the house. Raul fires a fourth and final round, and he hits Lynch in the back. Lynch tumbles down the entire flight of stairs and lands dead in the entranceway. Remember Jenny? She was in the bed. She's screaming, you'll hang for this. And Raul simply walks down the hall, slowly down the stairs, steps over Lynch's lifeless body, and heads out into the street. Now the neighbors have heard the gunshots. I think I would too. And they come running and say, was it a burglar? And Raul goes, no, he seduced my wife. And then he goes, I've warned her so many times. Now before Raoul was led away, he asked Jenny for a goodbye kiss. Yeah, that's what she thought. No, right? It's said that Jenny accompanied Lynch's body back to Utica and that she only came back to Batavia one other time in her life. Raoul stands trial for murder. I don't think he can say he's not guilty, right? Very apparent, he admitted to it, but he was acquitted. Now, was it signed of the times that that was justifiable homicide? Or was he such a big employer that that would have been a lot of lost jobs? I don't know the rationale. But he was a free man, and he went on to remarry and build that beautiful house on the corner of Ellicott and Richmond. So that is E. Newton Raoul, the man that got away with murder. And if you want to visit him, he's buried in Grandview Cemetery, out on Clinton Street. The mysterious ringing bell. Let me get a sip of water and I'll tell you about it. Now this story again reported in the paper, and it pertains to Richmond Avenue, not too far from the Richmond Mansion, or the Raoul Mansion. But it was a story about a front doorbell. And I know my neighbors still have a doorbell like this, and if you have an older home, or you may have seen one, it consists of a metal handle at the front door with a wire attached. The wire would run all the way to the kitchen, and a bell like this would then be attached to the wire, mounted usually in a corner of the kitchen up by the ceiling. And so that was the doorbell. The paper, again, reported about this mysterious ringing bell in this brick home on Richmond. The home originally was built as a single-family dwelling of local physician, but by 1883, when the paper reported this happening, it was a multi-family dwelling. So there were a number of people in the house, and they'd all go running to answer the door with this bell ringing. And when they got there, it would stop and no one would be there. And when they shut the door and went back in the house, it started to ring again. And it rang so violently, it actually put dents in the wall where the bell was mounted. Well, now the tenants were incredibly unnerved, and so they called in a veteran bell hanger by the name of Mr. Valentine. What a great job, right? Do you think we could find that job listing now, a veteran bell hanger, right? It's like a toll booth operator, right? Yeah. But Mr. Valentine came in. He examined the bell, the handle, the wire. He could find nothing wrong, but for good measure, he replaced the wire, and then the bell continued to ring. Well, you've got really unnerved tenants with this happening all the time. And so then they called in people of a scientific nature, according to the paper, and they examined the bell, the whole mechanism of the bell, and they said there is no earthly reason for this bell to ring. And so they chalked it up to supernatural activity. Now, it rang for a number of days, and then it mysteriously stopped. We don't know exactly where the house is, but if you know anybody on Richmond Avenue, I'd encourage you to inquire about their doorbells. Just see if they're still out there ringing the bells. Isn't he cute? Oh, yeah. They all want one of these. That was a pony, right? Okay, the Oak Street Specter. I want to tell you about the Oak Street Specter. And anybody familiar with the corner of Richmond and Oak in Batavia? I live very close. Have you ever noticed it to be quiet? Never. Almost any time of day, the truck traffic coming off the thruway, that corner is loud. When I take people on the walks, I can't even stop there. We have to move on to Lion Street or no one can hear me on that corner. But if you lived in Batavia back in 1905, the minute you passed that corner heading north on Oak, it got very desolate. Very few people. It was more just trees on one side, a bank of trees. On the other side of the road was a stagnant stream. Now, if you happen to be riding in June of 1905, around midnight, with two gentlemen, by the name of Martin Rupp and Joseph Green Tanner. They were heading home that night. They were in a horse-drawn wagon. And as they passed that corner, what should come up out of the stagnant stream but this ghastly creature? And it headed right toward the horses. Well, Joseph was a passenger, and he jumped down, he grabbed his whip, he slashed at it, and it disappeared. But they were not the only ones to see this. A number of people started seeing the specter, and they called it the Oak Street Specter. Now, it took different forms, and different people saw them. The paper reported again on Martin and his mother, because they saw it near their property, and they had to sick the dogs on it, and it disappeared under a wagon. It would take many forms, too. Mrs. Rupp reported seeing it as a headless woman, and she was dressed in priestly robes, and she danced about the heads of the horses till they were almost mad. Other people saw it as a tiny cat, but when pelted with stones, it would rise up into this bull, and it had twisted horns and red glowing eyes and smoke pouring from its nostrils. 2 lessons to be learned from this story. 1, never pelt a cat with stones. Never. And if offered a horse-drawn wagon ride down Oak Street around midnight, I would politely decline them. That's the Oak Street Specter. Oh, women in black. I have an outfit like this. I'm so excited. If you're coming to the cemetery tour on the 22nd, come see me in the mausoleum. Woman in black. If you lived in Batavia in 1881, maybe you knew Lack Dean, your past lives, right? Okay. Lack Dean worked on Main Street. I'm thinking maybe not the brewery, but maybe he worked in the brewery on Main Street. But every night he would walk home, and he would turn down Lion Street to walk. On one night in April, he saw a woman approaching him, coming toward him on the sidewalk. Now, Lack Dean was a very polite man, and he tipped his hat and said, "Good evening, ma'am." And when he looked more closely, because she didn't respond, she just disappeared. Well, now Lack Dean was not only polite, he was frightened to death. He ran all the way home, and the paper reported he stayed in bed for days. He was so traumatized by this. But again, he was not the only one to see this woman. Other Lion Street residents or people visiting Lion Street in the night had these encounters with this woman in black. And why do you think they called her that? She wore black. She was in a long black dress, a black bonnet, and a veil that completely covered everything, a black veil. She also had some unusual characteristics. People who saw her said she was almost 7 feet tall. She was a tall woman. Also, that she was very stiff and rigid. They described her as being as straight as a tallow candle. Now, the paper at the time, along with reporting about Mr. Dean's encounter, issued a warning to all people that lived on Lion Street or visited. They said, "Beware the woman in black, lest she scare the wits out of you." So anybody going down Lion Street tonight? Good, you're safe. I won't warn you guys. Oh, it's time for grave robbing. I'm so excited. We're back to living in Batavia. It's February 1862. If you're reading the paper, you may read this obituary. Mary Elizabeth Buchanan, only child of Asher and Rhoda Buchanan, full of intelligence and hope, stricken with consumption, died at the tender age of 21. Yes, Mary Elizabeth died of consumption, was buried in February 1862. But in April, when her parents came back to pay respect at her grave site, what do they find? But the grave has been dug up. Their daughter is no longer there. They said the only thing that was there were torn clothing that looks like they had been ripped from her body by a sacrilegious hand. Well, when Batavians heard that, they were outraged and they formed a committee to find the culprit. And unlike almost any committee I ever served on during my working days, this committee solved it, and they found him, and they found him quickly. Yes, they did. I want to serve on that committee next time. They found the culprit. This man, John Page, a young medical student. And he couldn't really deny it when they found him, for he was found with a box full of decayed body parts. And indeed, John confessed, yep, shortly after the burial, he dug up Mary Elizabeth's body solely for the purpose of practicing dissection. Now, Mr. Page was found guilty. He admitted to the crime. But to me, his punishment seems more a reward. He wasn't sent to prison. He was sent to Fort Scott, Kansas to be an assistant surgeon. I can only hope that his desire to save Civil War soldiers exceeded his desire to create new dissection opportunities. So that's John Page. Oh, we're heading to the Tonawanda. I've talked about grave robbing. Let's talk about cemeteries. Do you know that along the banks of the Tonawanda, this was actually deeded as Batavia's first cemetery in 1820. 3 years later, when Batavia became a village, they deeded land on the east side of town to establish a cemetery that is still used today, the historic Batavia Cemetery on Harvester Avenue. Now, one would think that having a cemetery in the middle of town on high ground, you'd want to move some bodies, right? You know, we know there are many spiritual reasons to bury along water, but flooding is not nice to coffins and bodies, and they have a tendency to travel. So it just made sense to me that they'd move these to the new cemetery, right? Makes sense, right? See, he agrees with me. It makes a lot of sense. Okay. But in 1903, when workers were putting in the South Lion Street Road, or street, connecting Main Street to South Main, what do they almost immediately dig up but the body of an unidentifiable man? Yep. And a short while later, don't they dig up a second body? But this body has a small coin purse filled with Spanish coins. And I don't know who they went to talk to, but it was finally determined that these were the bodies of soldiers from the War of 1812. Soldiers came up from New Jersey, a whole regiment of soldiers from New Jersey to fight in the war. And they were heading through Batavia to go on to Lewiston, Buffalo, and Niagara Falls. But typhoid fever hit the area in 1812, and at least 30 members of that group died here in Batavia. It was winter. They couldn't get those men back to New Jersey, so they were buried along the Tonawanda. Now, at the end of that road project, they dug up at least 5 or 6 bodies. And what did they do with them? Did they move them? No, they put them right back there along the creek. And if you go there now, don't try to go over the Lion Street Bridge. It would be very bad, right? It's close. There's no bridge, so don't try to go over it. But there is a plaque now noting those soldiers and that they're buried there.
Wasn't it on the opposite side from that sign?
All along that bank.
You're digging up now.
Right. Did you like when CVS went in? I was like, oh no.
You never know, we might find more.
You might. Now, a year after that road was put in, 1904, local leaders looked along the banks of the Tonawanda and said, you know, we should move the bodies. We should divvy up the land. That would be great for residential commercial development, right? If you noticed along the creek, there's houses, there's businesses, but I think they forgot the move the bodies part. Because the paper reported a story in 1957 when one of the businesses was putting in a gasoline tank for their business, and almost immediately they've got a skull and a rib. And by the end of their project, they had a whole skeleton, kind of like a Lego set. They had a whole skeleton. So I always tell people, admire the banks of the Tonawanda, but please don't go digging. Because what you find most likely will not be treasure. Unless you collect bones. Okay, we're gonna head on. Oh, we're gonna hang someone. Whew. Volunteers, no. Now, if you go, when you leave tonight, make sure you check out the parking lot, and right next to it, is it not a muffler shop? That was a site where public hangings took place for Genesee County. And I want to tell you about the very first person convicted of murder in Genesee County that was hanged on that site, not once, but 2 times. James McLean is the gentleman I'm talking about. And it seemed he had a dispute over a tree. It all started with a tree. James McLean said, "That's my tree," and his neighbor William Moore said, "It's my tree." And William Moore chopped the tree down, and it really made McLean so angry, he took an axe to Mr. Orr and killed him with a second blow of the axe. Now there's a third man involved, a man by the name of McLaughlin. And I think maybe he was trying to mediate it. You know, sometimes mediation doesn't work, right? He ended up dead too. But nobody knows who killed McLaughlin, whether it was Orr or McLean. But when it was all said and done, you had 2 bodies, 1 live man with a bloody axe, and guess what he did? He ran away. But he wasn't good at it. They found him a few days later. The militia found him in a tavern in Canandaigua. They brought him back, and he was found guilty, sentenced to hang. Hanging date, August 28, 1807, right over there. Now, all you people live in Batavia are going, "Oh boy, a hanging. We've never had a hanging before." You all pack a picnic hamper, you bring a blanket, and we know you all brought your children, because what a great moral lesson for right and wrong, right? This is what will happen. So you're all there, you had your picnic lunch, you're waiting for the hanging. Okay? So McLean is led to the Gibbet, or Gibbet, depending on who wants to pronounce it, or scaffold, but it's actually a gibbet. And what makes that different, it's not a trap door. It's a rope and a weight is dropped. So rather than the body going down, it's yanked up for the hanging. McLean, the rope was put around his neck, the weight was dropped, the rope broke, and McLean fell to the ground. He was a little shaken up, but he wasn't dead. And he said, "Please don't hang me again. Please." Well, an argument started in the crowd, you people. This side said, "Let him go. You hanged him. He was sentenced to hang." He did. It was a few seconds. But let him go. He hanged. Well, you people must have hated your lunch or had bad dessert, or maybe no dessert. Because you said, "Hang him again." 2 men died. Hang him again. Well, who sided with who? The sheriff likes you guys. I bet he didn't have dessert either. Because indeed, he sent the county clerk for a stronger rope. And the second hanging of James McLean was successful. 7 men were hanged on that site between 1807 and 1881. Some say their spirits still linger there. Personally, if I was a spirit, I don't want to hang out at a muffler shop parking lot. So I think they followed the gibbet where it lives now, right here in this building. So your last story, if I'm correct, is about the Holland Land Office. Many believe that Joseph Ellicott is still here. Now, Joseph Ellicott started as a surveyor with the land company. Back in 1797, the land company bought most of western New York from the Senecas. And so Ellicott's first job was to survey land. But he then became the land agent. And for a good at least 20 years, he was the land agent here. So he's a very powerful man. He had a beautiful house. And he is said not to be a very nice man to deal with at all. And toward the end of his tenure in this job, he fell under a lot of public criticism, as did the land company. So when he finally retired at the age of 60, he was really a broken man physically and mentally. His mental health continued to deteriorate to the point that his family felt they had no recourse but to commit him to an asylum. And it was there in 1826 that Ellicott took his own life by hanging himself in his closet. So many believe he came back here as a spirit because it would have been better days when he was powerful and in charge. And perhaps he's here alone, but I like to think those 7 guys from the parking lot are over here keeping him company, because who wants to be alone even in the spirit? So again, I want to thank you for being here this evening. And I believe that Ryan will let you tour the Gibbet, which lives now in this building, the very one where James McLean met his end the second time.
Excuse me, I just wanted to say something. The Gibbet was missing for a long time, and my father, Walter Wyman, helped to find it.
Oh, wow.
He found it in a
I remember once when that Gibbet was used in a haunted house in Batavia. And somebody jumped down from the rope with strobe lights, and I just about lost it. And I haven't been in a haunted house since.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Sure. Thank you, Connie. And if anybody does want to do the walking version of this and actually go to the sites that we talked about, there are still some spots available. We're doing them every Friday in October. Total of 6 times possibly. So, however, we've already filled up once. There's only 5 chances left to do this. So, if you are interested, give me a call and I'll get you on the list. But we've got a lot of those coming up in October and into November, and Wonderland of Trees is right around the corner even. So,
You want to mention the cemetery walk?
yes, I will do that. So, Saturday, October 22nd will be the historic Batavia Cemetery Ghost Walk. When does that start, Connie?
The first walk, I believe, is 7. They go out every 15 minutes, but you do need to call for reservations.
Yes.
And if you do come, I'll see you dressed as the woman in black. No, it's not.
Well, she will be in black.
I will be in black. I'm going to be in a mourning outfit, but I will be sitting in the mausoleum, so I'd love to see you all there.
And I'll also be there, but not
Yes.
at the mausoleum.
Are you Mr. Fish?
I will be Eli
Eli
Fish,
Fish.
so.
Yes.
We don't know what he looks like, so this is what he looked like. Alright, so if anybody is interested in looking at the Gibbet or Gibbet, I will go over and turn on the lights. And help yourself to the rest of the cookies and coffee, and thank you.
Thank you.